Welcome to Common 2021. Hi, my name is Chaka Benson. I'm associated with the Black Patches Collective. I'm here today to teach you a little bit about modular synthesis, going just beyond the basics. I just wanted to let you know a little bit about my background real quick. I'm a modular synthesis, obviously. I've been operating out of Philadelphia for probably about 4 years. Before that, I was into electronic music, more on the software synthesis side. And it always felt like, hardware was something that was never really kind of in play for me. And, I had a little period where I messed with a lot of DAWs and sequencers kind of only on the PC side. When I kind of got back to it, I discovered that there was this whole world of Eurorack just out there waiting to be kind of tapped into, and it was accessible, it was immediate, you could touch it, it was, there was a whole ecosystem out there, there were videos, people supporting each other, and I thought that was pretty cool, so I kind of got involved with that. My first system was a Mother 32. I think a lot of people got into that system. It's relatively good way to kind of get into it. And so I just wanted to kind of share with you guys some of my experiences, some of my journeys, some of the things that I've looked at, approaches, techniques, things like that along the way. I feel like one of the questions you get when you're really starting out in this journey is, that ever question of what to buy next. There's all these different options, there's different categories of things, right? And so, again, that's what I want to kind of help you a little bit with and talk about what we're going to do. So that's coming up. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this overall, like what that ever creeping question of what to do next, what do I need to buy next? And I think even before you get to that, you need to think about some philosophies, have some kind of guiding principles to start you off. Like I mentioned earlier that I started off with a semi-modular system. That's a good approach to have. And it allows you to kind of slowly move into a bigger system. For me, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just knew what I was interested in. Initially, it was just kind of making some sounds and make myself smile. And then eventually, I kind of got into performing live. And what became important for me then was more along the lines of things that would give me a lot more options in the performance realm, and then help me think of ideas kind of on the fly, things that really help improvisation. And also, I want to kind of have a pathway for what I'm doing. So anything new that I bring in, I want it to work with what I already have. So those were some of the main guiding principles. And along the way, I kind of made some connections in my mind where, building a Eurorack system is a lot like a deck building game. Like, I don't know if you guys know the game Thunderstone, but in that game, you start off with small units, and then you're constantly improving to different versions of those units, and it doesn't happen overnight. And if you reach too far too quickly, you end up losing the game because you have to invest all these resources to chase something you don't already, haven't invested enough mind share into. So really, I think that's another thing, is to really try to get the most out of what you have, begin to see the path forward in terms of what features you'd like to have in your system. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what those features are, at least how that kind of mapped out and how that sort of unfolded for me as I went along. And the other thing I want you to kind of think about too is not just the modules themselves, but also some of the things around that, that you will need for your performance. Things just as simple as, how are you going to transport to a set? The tables, your studio setup, cables, mixers, things like that. Those are all things that you're going to need to think about along the way, and always try to improve on what you already have, right? And again, this doesn't happen all overnight. You really have more of an advantage if you already have something, already have an approach, and then you kind of go from there, right? One of the things when I talk about this sort of gradual approach, always remember that at least now that we're, now in the time and age that we're talking, a lot of this equipment still keeps its resale value pretty good. I would say, looking at resources like a Reverb, or going on some of the support forums that are out there for Eurorack. We all know who they are. Going out there and kind of keeping an eye on what's out there, and monitoring the marketplace. You can go from, say, something like, I have an oscillator that I want to kind of improve on, to a complex oscillator. And that was kind of the story of this gadget right here. This complex oscillator from Instro really kind of started off as just a plain Jane oscillator, Pittsburgh oscillator, that I was able to sell. Then I went up to the Instro Troika, which is like a triple oscillator that has some nice features in terms of changing its shapes. And eventually I sold that and was able to take that over to Instruo, I'll get that correct, the Instruo CSL, which is probably top of the line complex oscillator. Some might argue about the Make Noise oscillator or even the Endorphins, but this thing is packed with features. I can't see myself needing to do too much after that. So that's what I mean by, I didn't just go right out and buy the CSL. I started off with something small and incrementally kind of built up on that. The same kind of idea exists with some of these other modules that I have in here, such as the QPOS or the FX8. These were smaller, less feature-packed types of things that I owned before I kind of went on to that next level. Same thing with the case, same thing with just about every gadget that I have. And I try to really learn as much of that gadget as I possibly can. And that's, to me, is the best way to deal with sort of that gear acquisition syndrome, that gas that you get, wanting to get the next thing. Right, the time I'm making this video, Beads just came out from Mutable Instruments, right? Which, if you've been following along, that could be called a Clouds 2. I don't need it. No, I'm not going to run out and get it. I have plenty of things that can kind of get to that functionality, get sort of that texture-rich sound. So that's another question as you move along is, okay, when you see something new and you think you have to have it, what do you already have that can give you that sound, right? I think a few years back, the Moog Sub-Harmonicon came out. You can only get it if you took this workshop at MoogFest, right? There's ways to actually patch up, a harmonic oscillator, and to get, if not the Moog sound, but to get that type of, those types of features in an oscillator. I could even point out this one module, Stages, as a feature in it that allows you to go into what they call Ouroboros mode, and it becomes a harmonic oscillator. So there's always these hidden things that are out there. Read your manuals, read them again, watch the videos, watch them again. Watch videos for things that you aren't even interested in, because techniques are sometimes taught to you in those videos. I'll even watch really old videos just to get a flavor for what's going on. Raoul's World of Synthesis, those are black and white, dope for videos, are immensely useful. I recommend, going back in and watching those again. We all know about Chris Myers and all the beginning stuff. So, avail yourself of that, but never stop watching it, and don't just blow something off because you don't have an interest in it, because you may pick up on something else completely unrelated to what's being presented. Or I feel like it should be rampage because it's kind of based on ramps, but that's a whole other thing. More or less, you know, when you're starting off, people talk about the first thing that you should get is a maths. That's all I read about, and then I found out what the maths actually was emulating. And then reading a bit further, finding out that rampage is similar to what, you know, what the maths is doing, but it has a little bit different options in terms of how it interfaces with those functions. So I've had the rampage pretty much since the beginning, and it's, you know, it's in the middle of every patch that I deal with, you know, and it's pretty versatile. I'm not going to give you a complete rundown of it. You can definitely check the notes. But this is a utility. This is an LFO. This is an envelope generator. It's so many different things. It's going back to that idea of patch programmability, where things are more or less an open slate, and then you conceive what you want to do with that. So now let's move on to sound makers. And here we're going to talk about oscillators, filters again, and drum modules. Okay, now let's start with the drum modules. So you have things like a Mutant Snare and a Plonk. Those are the only two drum modules that I have in this system currently, but I have a couple of others. You know, the way to kind of think about these things, depending on what you have, is almost like a complete synthesizer voice in and of itself, where you've got a noise source, an oscillator, possibly a filter built in. But these things are all kind of built into one circuit and gives you some options for, you know, doing things that you would typically want to do with a drum, like accent or affecting the cutoff of its filter, things of that nature, right? So, you know, but always keep in mind, though, that what comprises a drum and the fact that you could patch up and get a way more flexible sound, well, in some cases, than you could with just a, you know, sort of all-in-one drum module. So it kind of takes you away from that idea of being able to understand the concepts at that fundamental level, but, you know, it does help. I'll say it to you that way. So this guy here, the Mutant Snare, great module built on sort of like the 909, 808 sort of paradigm, and has a lot of flexibility. What I really love about it, though, is this external in, where you can bring in sounds from external, and then now you're starting to be able to take advantage of the filter that's on board with this thing, and it's a great little piece. I also like it for cymbals and you know, things like hi-hat, closed and open, because you can take advantage of modular to get the variation in those things where you want to do panning and things of that nature. And I also talked about how filter could be a sound source. This is notoriously great as a sound source. You're looking for things that you can send into self-oscillation through resonance, right? So this guy peaks pretty well with certain levels of cutoff, right? And then you can drive it with frequency, with volt per octave, and play this guy just like you would anything else, maybe send it into another filter. This guy has a lot of options for doing feedback modulation. So, you know, always keep in mind that your filter could also be another source of, you know, another source of sound. You treat it just as an oscillator in some cases. There are filters that have different characteristics around resonance, and again, I don't want to get too far into it, but the QPOS might not be what you're looking for that type of activity, although you do have frequency inputs. But let's table that for a sec. Yeah, so that kind of covers what I would want to do in that area, which are very important. I think probably the single most important thing are attenuators. I just acquired this guy here, this Lopsis. It's at 4 different. You can go bipolar, 4 different attenuators, bipolar or unipolar. So meaning you can go from -5 to 5 volts, so you get the full range of that knob versus, you know, just from +5. So what this will give you is a lot more fine control. So if you're modulating something, you're not getting the full range. You're more constraining that range of what's going to happen in that modulation. And it'll give you a little bit more room to develop an idea. So that attenuators are very important. The idea of attenuversion, that has to do with going from negative to positive. Again, I don't want to go too far into that, but just to say that these pieces are very important. Over here as well, the WMD SPO, scalar, polarizer, and offset. Okay, that says everything. But what's cool about this, guys, it can take in two different sources and pull that back out for you. So you can pull a signal way down, and these indicators tell you what's happening along the way. So that's a neat, that's a really interesting gadget and really kind of like fundamental in everything that I'm doing. But again, attenuators are everywhere, right? They're on the modules themselves. Again, this guy, Rampage, can serve as an attenuator if patched correctly. But all these trim pots, if you look for those tiny trim pots, these are more or less attenuation that occurs on the module. So you might want to look for modules where if you're comparing one module versus another, onboard attenuation might be the difference maker. All right, so let's talk a little bit about sound processors. I just thought of a few things off of the top of my head. Again, there's plenty of others, and some of these, if you talk about them long enough, can show up in another category. So again, just a loose kind of way to think about things to kind of give you a path forward. And again, back to that deck building concept, one of the things I failed to mention there was you want to have a balance to how you build things. So if you're building a voice, let's say, accomplish what you're doing for that particular voice and then move on to the next one. Or you can incrementally build all the voices kind of at the same time, but be aware of where you're going. That's really kind of the point I was trying to make with that crazy analogy. Please, thank you for indulging me that. Yeah, so with sound processors, we have clocks, reverbs, sample and hold, and envelopes. So I'm going to go through sort of like a basic clock setup that I have, and then we're going to move into the sample and holds and envelopes there, and then I'll mention a little bit about the reverb and my approach to that. So if you look at this little complex over here of wires, typically what I like to do to make clocks sort of jump out in a patch is use yellow cable so that I know all the routing along the lines of the yellow cable have something to do with tempo, right? So in this particular setup, I'm using This Is Not Rocket Science Tuesday as the sort of driving clock here, right? So I can speed up the overall clock, I can slow it down with that knob there, but they also have, and this is another great thing about this module, is it has an idea of, you know, a complete loop or a complete measure consisting of beats, and then within the beat you have ticks, right? So in going around, starting with the first one here, that's 2 ticks for every beat, 3 ticks for every beat, 4, 5, etc. Or I could affect 2 beats per loop, 3 beats per loop, 4, 5, etc. And then I get a tick for each one of those coming out. So the cool thing, what I've done here is I've patched up the ticks, so then I can affect all of the downstream tempo from that, right? Let's go back to 2. So the way I've kind of patched that up is I've gone into my rotating clock divider. We'll talk about that in a second. And then I have that signal multed back out so I can use this main tempo in a bunch of different places. Okay, and so with this rotating clock divider, right now what I'm getting is divisions of the main clock, right? So for every beat, then I can get every other beat, every third, fourth, and on down the line. Rotating clock divider, where it becomes rotating is control voltage here will cause these numerical assignments to shift downwards or upwards, depending on if it's negative voltage. But when the voltage comes in, or reset, which causes a shift back up to the top if we're doing something on the rotate side. So that's another way to synchronize something. But right now, we're just splitting up and subdividing off of that main beat. We're getting some versatility off of this button, and then we can overall speed things up here. And really, where I'm driving is all of my sequencers, right? So you notice this is not Rocket Science Tuesday, is a sequencer. Marbles is a sequencer. Ornament and Crime is a sequencer, and these are going to run off of the clocks that I've set up here. A couple things I'd like to point out. So Marbles has a tempo side. It also has a melody side, more melodic. So, and typically the melodic side runs in time with the tempo side. I've broken that by using an external clock run from the pulsar. The pulsar allows me to run sequences kind of on the fly very immediately. So rather than using the same clock that I have for my tempo, I'm breaking that with my pulsar here. Pulsar is pretty interesting, right? It has different modes of operation, but what I tend to use a lot of is this notion of Euclidean beats or Euclidean notation, right? And so if you notice there's 16 pulses that are being hit upon, and I have 6 different hits that are happening, and they're evenly spread around that 16. And as I add 7 and 8, the way it works is it evenly spreads those along for the number that I have defined, and I could make that less. I could make it 13, right? And it still evenly distributes those. Where it really gets fun is when you want to start to modulate that and then get a little bit of variation on, if you see that moving around there, then I can start to get a little bit of variation on those patterns. So that's typically a way I write my drums. Is I'll get a basic idea and then I'll start to vary that thing with some random voltage, and then I have some variation in my drums. I can kind of let that go. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I'm really passionate about it, and so I will be appearing with, like I mentioned, the Tetsu Collective. So definitely, if you want to see some of these ideas in action, be sure to catch that set along with all of the other great artists, and have fun at Common Currents Festival.